I'm author and critic David Agranoff. I'm a horror and science fiction author, critic, and researcher. In this podcast, I wanted to provide in-depth interviews and panel discussions with everyone from New York Times bestselling authors to researchers, musicians, and anyone I find interesting. Welcome to Postcards from a Dying World. Hello and welcome to Postcards from a Dying World. I am your host, David Agranoff, and as always, I have a very special guest. This one is the author of one of my favorite reads of the year so far, and admittedly, I had to do a little research to remember the book better because I've been so scatterbrained. So if I seem a little distracted today, I apologize to the listeners ahead of time. Dreck by Cliff Jones Jr. is a truly fantastic and excellent entry into what I like to think of as pink beam fiction, which is Philip K. Dick inspired. However, the subgenre that I think you associate yourself most with is Dreampunk. Cliff, can you tell the folks who you are, where you came from, and what the hell is Dreampunk?
Oh, wow. Okay. That's going to be the whole podcast then. Let me see.
No, just give us
I'm
a
just kidding.
start.
All right. Yeah. So let's see. I'm from Texas. I kind of grew up in a rural, not a lot of money, just like, that kind of thing, Bible Belt. Anyway, and then I went into computer science. I got into coding, and I did a bunch of art when I was growing up and everything. And I gradually got into linguistics, and I wound up getting a master's in linguistics and teaching English in Japan and doing that kind of thing. And then only as an adult, like after a good while, this is probably like 2014 actually, that I got into Philip K. Dick. So I saw a Netflix documentary and I got super interested, and I started just reading all his books, and I got serious about writing. So that was, a while back that I really started to focus on writing as my main thing.
Do you consider Phil to be the reason why you wanted to go beyond just being a reader and become a writer?
I mean, I had tried to do some writing before that, and I think before that I was mostly influenced by Haruki Murakami. So like I had a story that eventually got into my first collection that I put out called Mirror Maze. I'm wearing a shirt that says Mirror Maze. Yeah, a story in there called Angel in the Cave. That one, an early version of that I started before I got into Philip K. Dick at all and started working on a big novel that I still haven't finished yet. Yeah, that one I feel like a lot of my earlier stuff was pretty influenced by Murakami, but then yeah, I got focused on reading all the Philip K. Dick stuff and reading similar maybe kind of stuff like Ted Sturgeon and James Tiptree Jr. and Ursula K. Le Guin. So PKD kind of got me into that whole area, of I guess new wave sci-fi. So that really kind of did it for me, where I said, okay, seriously, I'm going to really focus on this and make it like something I actually do and get published and all that,
Right, and we're going to talk a lot of probably about Phil today, and some of you might be wondering why this is not on my other podcast, Dickheads, and it's because I wanted this to come out this century. So, because I have no control over when Dickheads episodes come out, and one of the main reasons why I want this to come out quick is I really want people to check out Dreck, your new book, which we'll get to eventually. But I just really appreciate this book. In fact, I just nominated it to be on the long list for the Wonderland Award, the Bizarro Fiction Awards for next year.
Nice.
For the 2022 awards are coming up, but for the 2023, I've already suggested it for the long list for best novel because awesome. I think it should be considered there. So that was just this morning. But along with the person on the other side of this book by Samuel Tanner, who was recently on the show too.
Cool,
So,
cool.
um, so anyways, but Phil is, how we met each other, the common interest in Philip K. Dick and those things. But you said that, he was a gateway to you for other new wave science fiction authors. Do you
Yeah.
feel most connected to the new wave or cyberpunk, or what kind of science fiction do you feel most connected to?
Yeah, I think new wave. I think before I knew about Philip K. Dick, I did read a lot of Kurt Vonnegut. So he's one of my favorites too. And he's not really, he didn't put himself in the sci-fi area, but a lot of his stuff sci-fi.
Indiana raised Kurt Vonnegut.
Yeah.
Just shout out to the Hoosiers.
All right. Yeah. And when I was younger, let me see. I mean, I read different stuff like Clockwork Orange in 1984 and stuff when I was in high school. And oh yeah, when I was really I used to read what's his name now? Invisible Man, War of the World, H.G. Wells. Yeah, so I read a bunch of
Right,
H.G. Wells
right.
when I was a kid. I love that. And Michael Crichton also, those things. So it's like those were some sort of sci-fi type stuff that I was reading, but I just got really seriously into it with Philip K. Dick. And so yeah, I think I found the new wave stuff of like the 60s, 70s to be like my favorite.
Now, what is it about Philip K. Dick? Is it the what is reality? Is it the questioning of reality? Is it the themes, the style, or just his weird life? Because there's lots of different reasons that
Yeah.
people get into Phil.
Yeah. And that kind of brings me to the thing where I was going before with the Dreampunk. So I was gonna bring this all eventually to the the Dreampunk label because that's kind of something I didn't even know I was doing. When I was writing a bunch of short stories, mostly Wattpad. Wattpad's like an online publishing thing that I used to do. I don't really do anymore. But yeah, I started my novel there, and I would do like little contests for short stories there and stuff. And so back then, I'm trying to figure out how to label my work and what tags to use and all that. So it's kind of important to figure out these tags. And I would use like Slipstream for one, and because it's like I like writing stuff that's maybe sci-fi, maybe fantasy, maybe like paranormal stuff, maybe horror. So it's all this kind of like different genre stuff, and it's hard to put a label on that and be like, what is it that I'm writing here? And but a common thread that I found was basically there's a lot of stuff to do with like literal dreams or hallucinations or just false worlds and this kind of stuff. And so when I was looking at those kind of labels, Dreampunk was one that I found, and I was like, this really hits the nail on the head for me, the type of stuff that I write, whether it's any of those traditional genres, or kind of all of them mixed together. And so there was a guy that had asked me to write a description of what Dreampunk is, for Wattpad, because he was like, he wanted to put it on his list of fantasy subgenres, and I had
Mm-hmm.
said that I put it in my profile that I write Dreampunk, and so he had me do this whole thing. And then once I committed to it like that, I wrote up this whole article, and I'm like, okay, I got really into it then,
Right.
so it's a lot of happenstance kind of stuff. But it was only as I was writing that article that I actually looked at Philip K. Dick stuff. And I was a huge fan. He was my number one influence at the time, and I was like, okay, Philip K. Dick stuff could even sort of be classified as this. Most of it, it kind of fits into this whole false world kind of internal worlds, involving technology usually, but not always. So a
Mm-hmm.
lot of Philip K. Dick stories, like Cosmic Puppets and stuff, and like Transmigration of Timothy Archer. They're not always sci-fi, but they always feel like Philip K. Dick stories. You know what I mean? So it's like
Right.
there's a common thread there, whether it's sci-fi or not. And that's I really identify with that. And so for me, it's not necessarily like the tech. I'm not like I appreciate cyberpunk, but I'm not really drawn to cyberpunk that much because it's so heavy on the tech. That's not really usually what I'm interested in. And like Dreck, for example, Dreck, it has tech in it. It's full of tech, but it's not really focused on it that much. It's more about people's weird, trippy experiences, and figuring out what's really going on and what's real and stuff. So yeah, that's the big thing with Philip K. Dick that draws me to his stories, and also the exegesis, his big philosophical notes and all that, and just reading about his life and everything. It's that whole thing. Like I mentioned, I was raised in the Bible Belt, but more than that, it was very sort of fundamentalist Christian type household, and we were going to church every Sunday, and we would go to different churches because my dad would eventually have some kind of problem with one of the church's leadership, and then we'd be like, all right, on to the other next church, and so that whole growing up in that.
Right. And when you were here in San Diego and we were hanging out, I didn't you mention that your father is kind of sort of writing his exegesis in a sense right now too?
I wouldn't call it that exactly.
He's
but
writing a novel, right? Or a Christian novel. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a novel, that's like based on, like Jesus, but more than that, on one of the apostles. And well, I don't know, I guess he'd probably say it's based mostly on Jesus, but his whole approach though with his writing this story is he's digging into all this research and making these conclusions that kind of go against the grain, with a lot of accepted scholarship and everything. And so for him, yeah, I guess it's like a exegesis as far as him digging in and making all these doing all this research, but he's just not writing it all down necessarily. He just wants to tell people about it. So the book itself is
and the reason I mention this is because I'm sure you see the parallels to the last 8 years of Phil's life where he was questioning doctrine, but Phil was writing Gnostic fiction since the beginning, because Earthshaker, his first attempt at a novel, was a Gnostic fantasy. So I mean, he's been
and so
yeah
and so yeah, my dad, I wouldn't he's pretty mainstream Christianity, but still though he'll find things that kind of aren't what people think necessarily, and like for example our friend Keith Giles, he's kind of gone further off than my dad even, but still Keith Giles is Christian. He's not like he's not as far off the deep end as Philip K. Dick, maybe I'd say. But maybe he's getting there, I don't know.
Well, part of the difference with Phil was that in those last 8 years, like Phil would have like a week where he decided that strict Torah interpretation was absolutely the truth, and then for like 2 weeks he would believe that, and then he would change his mind and say no, it's this esoteric form of Manichaeism, or no, now it's Christianity. And one of the things I know that KW Jeter said was frustrating is the rest of them had to like stay pat with what they believed, but Phil could just change his
he
belief.
Could just change every day if he wants, and it's like, actually we all can. That's the secret, you know what I mean? But people think you're inconsistent or you're just a flake or whatever if you don't have the same beliefs today that you did a year ago. But it's okay.
Actually, I think it was Doris Sauter who said that, his longtime neighbor, but because she was Episcopalian priest, the student, so she had particular beliefs, and she said it was frustrating to have these arguments with Phil because he could just change his mind on a dime.
Right. And it's like, but if you're having an argument with somebody, you would like to expect that they could change their mind. That's sort of like, you can maybe change your minds a little bit, but most people don't do that.
They were talking about beliefs. So it's so, but it's interesting anyways. It's interesting that I just saw that parallel with, I'm sure with you saw a bit of Phil and your father's journey with with that book, and vice versa.
Which is one of the things. There's different things about Philip K. Dick that sort of remind me of my dad, and other things that remind me of me. So it's like he does feel like a kindred spirit. Forgive the pun with the middle name, but it's true though. Like I remember when I learned his middle name was Kindred. I learned what the K was. I was like, of course, okay, wow. It's great. Because by then I already felt that kinship. Like I was already like, it's just something that really resonates, and it's a lot of it is the approach. It's like the mental kind of approach to the world, and just and being curious and trying to investigate ruthlessly, and you go on and on investigating and you never really settle. I like that.
Right. Just look at Phil for a moment.
The Borg Phil.
Yeah. Sorry about that. Um, so my, yeah, the thing about this, I what I call pink beam fiction, in my,
Mhm.
is the people that are inspired by Phil, that are kind of trying to ride the same kind of wave too. And so whether you call it Dreampunk or pink beam, or just bizarro fiction, or just new wave science fiction, or just science
Mhm.
fiction,
Oh yeah,
um
yeah, absurdist. I got the book Dreck was going on the little Amazon charts under absurdist fiction, and I was looking at that, and I was like, yeah, yeah, absurdist. That's a good label too. I like
yeah,
that.
yeah, it is. And if you look at, not all Phil is absurdist, but some
Yeah,
is. Like The Man Who
yeah.
Japed is
Mhm.
kind of absurdist, more in the and I think Dreck comes with the where the absurdist thing comes in is a little bit of the Vonnegut um
Mm.
influence. But also one of the things is Phil's underrated for his humor.
Yeah.
And one of the things is that the absurdist nature of what Phil does sometimes gets dialed higher in certain books, like The Man Who Japed or Galactic Pod Healer or whatever.
Mhm.
But anyways, we're not talking about his book.
Yeah.
We're talking about your book. So
But for example, though, when you say his humor, the most obvious uh, place where I could see the humor, where it's really definitely intended as humor and taken as humor, is in Ubik. At the
yeah,
chapter headings for the little ads for Ubik, they're hilarious, especially the running thing where it's like safe when used as directed.
yeah,
Everything's it's like you have to say that it's safe, which makes you wonder about it. But Ubik is like it's funny because it seems like this sort of nefarious kind of like what's so dangerous about this weird product that's everywhere, but it's also sort of like a stand-in for God, basically. It's a yeah, it comes to that. It comes to like I am,
yeah.
and so
Which, I mean, Phil's darkest book, Three Stigmata of Palmer Eldritch, has absolutely hilarious moments in it.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah,
Moments of oh, and even Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, the fake police station that's all androids that don't know they're androids, is
yeah,
is
yeah.
is
Well, don't
absolutely
give anything
hilarious.
away, that none of that was in the movie, so
Yeah.
so people have to read that.
Yeah. Well, it was written in
Don't, yeah, I know.
1966, so I'm not going to
Don't
feel.
spoil this book from
Yeah. I won't
but
spoil Drac, but yeah, I mean, what I'm, the only reason I mention this is because I think we, you know, for those of us who kind of are writing the fiction, that we're trying to ride the same kind of wave that Phil was doing, um, it's kind of fun to kind of pick up that wave and to talk
yeah,
about, where you're picking it up. But
yeah.
and I gave you a hard time in my review about the Dreampunk thing, just because I it's there's so many subgenres of science
Yeah,
fiction that have adopted the punk label, and the most annoying to me being hope punk, um which
yeah. I haven't really read it. I don't really know what that's about.
yeah, which apparently is just science fiction that's hopeful. And they're,
Yeah. I
but
mean, yeah, if it's not punk, then it's a weird label. But
yeah,
the thing is, yeah, that's kind of what I would say for the Dream Punk collections that I'm putting out. Like Mirror Maze is first, and then Somniscope is going to come out soon, and Jeff Noon's in that, and it by the way, and
yeah,
he's a cool guy. But I mean, there's a lot of punk influence, with a lot of these
yeah,
writers. I mean, it's not coming out of nowhere. It does come, I feel like, more than a lot of sci-fi punk subgenres. Dream punk is pretty connected to cyberpunk. It sort of seems like a continuation of cyberpunk. Like when we're past the obvious technology and we go into like drugs and nanoids in our brains and this weird states like that, you know what I mean? So the technology can kind of eventually become invisible and it's all mental. That's sort of the idea.
and look, giving you I'm not giving Dream Punk a hard time per se. I'm just
Yeah, I know what you mean though with the
as an
label.
actual punk rocker, there's got to be a point where, and for me, it was hope punk that just that
Yeah,
it crossed the line. It crossed the line for
Yeah,
me.
and you
And
heard now punk? Now punk, I think is I don't even know what that is because if it's
what
now,
is that?
is it even sci-fi? I don't know. It's one of those genres that's basically like, oh, it's like contemporary fiction. What is it? I don't know. Anyway, maybe I'm totally misrepresenting now punk. I don't know.
Well,
But
right. And then I've got, maybe I should have called Punk Rock Ghost Story Punk Punk.
I don't know.
Because
But
it's
yeah,
actually
yeah.
about punk rock, right?
I feel like I got a little I forgot where I was going. Oh yeah, now I know why I brought up Ubik was because I was gonna say a lot of the stuff that I'm doing with writing, I don't necessarily know what I'm doing until I've done it, you know? And
Yeah.
so that was the thing, for example, like with the Dreampunk label, I'd written a bunch of stories and I was, halfway through a novel before I found the label of Dreampunk. I didn't decide to write Dreampunk. I was like, I decided to put a hashtag on my stories, basically. It's marketing is what that is.
Which is great. And so so that leads me to the process
Well,
question, which is
well, there was one more thing though,
yeah. Okay,
because
go ahead.
I kind of, I kind of didn't quite finish what I was saying about the Ubik. I brought up Ubik because that I didn't realize until after I had already finished Dreck that it really is a big Philip K. Dick novel, like in a lot of ways. It has a lot in common with stuff, in particular, like the thing about God in the gutter, like the trash, basically, like the spray can and all this, like, nonsense junk kind of stuff. And then I named the book Dreck. It's just like in the book I kind of equate Dreck with you know like technology a lot, like a lot of advances in technology and, like, gadgets and stuff like that. And I'm just kind of like putting it down and being like, this is a bunch of garbage, sort of, you know what I mean? But it's not really a bunch of garbage. It's really powerful and it's really interesting stuff. But anyway, yeah, so it kind of reminded me of that, like even the name of the book being a short name like that, like I think I was influenced a lot by Ubik with this, and I just didn't realize it till I was done.
Yeah. So that leads me to the process question, which is that sounds like you're a pantser. You don't outline or plan before you sit down to write, or
I do outline
okay.
and then I re-outline, but I don't outline very formally generally. But usually what I do is I'll know how many chapters there are going to be, and I
I'm an
might.
evangelical outliner, by the way.
Oh
So
yeah.
so you're
No,
you're
I
you're in a
used to
safe
teach.
space.
I used to teach like at writing in a writing center at a community college, and yeah, so I mean, I know about this stuff, like how it's like you really do need to plan out the structure. You need to have this like story arc, and you need to, and you need to also think about considerations like how long it's taking. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
the word count's important. You got to know how long of a thing are you writing basically when you start it. That's going to affect what you do. And so yeah, I definitely do like planning things out, even chapter by chapter. But I definitely am comfortable with going off the rails and replanning.
Well, the best-selling author in the world is an absolute pantser, but he's
Stephen
also,
King, yeah.
yeah, and he's also written books like Under the Dome. So those things
Yeah.
happen. And and by the way,
Mhm.
yeah, I and I'm the same way. I outline, and when that outline is still an organic thing that can
Mhm.
be changed. And there's a lot of times in novels when I'm halfway through, if I start learning things or figuring things out about the novel, I will go and change the outline and
Yeah.
you know,
And a lot of times, and also, if you point to real famous examples like Stephen King, for example, it's like, well, also Stephen King has the freedom to do whatever he wants. So, you know what I mean? So he
yeah,
doesn't have to think about word count. He can do whatever word count he wants and still get
yeah,
it published and still get it read. And so particularly if you're working on like your first novel, there's a pretty small target window you're supposed to hit, for the, to try to find an agent and all that. I mean, it's different if you're self-publishing and but and so or even for a lot of small publishers, they might not care as much, but trying to find an agent, man, they
yeah.
really care about that stuff.
Well, and Stephen King, you can ask this structuralist. All my favorite Stephen King books are the ones that had the baked in endings, where like he knew what the ending was when he
Yeah,
started.
right.
And
Yeah,
like
so
the Dead
sometimes you can
Zone,
feel that.
Misery, Dolores Claiborne,
Mhm.
they're ones that like he knew where he was going when he started, even if he didn't outline or plan. He had a target he was shooting for. Whereas
Mhm.
the ones that I just find unreadable, like Under the Dome or Lisi's Story, or the ones where he just started writing with no plan. And it's obvious. It's very obvious. As much as I love Stephen King, all respect to Uncle Steve, but it's just
Yeah.
I'm a structuralist, and he knows it too. Though I heard in an interview recently
Yeah.
where he was talking about how he could never write a whodunit,
Yeah.
that it would be impossible for him to write a whodunit. You
Yeah,
know?
it's a big puzzle because
Yeah.
yeah, you got to plan everything out. And that's one thing, like I mentioned about writing the chapters. Like I'll name chapters a lot of times ahead of time, and I know how many chapters. And I don't know why I do this, but it's I just like little mathematical kind of puzzles. Like in Dreck, I have 3 parts, and each part is 9 little chapters. So it's
Yeah.
a novella, but it's got 27 chapters. And for my novel that I've been working on for a long time, it's got 3 parts also, and each part is 12 chapters. It's like I just like to do that, and I have a theme, like how I name the chapters. I'm very particular about that.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, there's that orderly part of my brain, and then the story part of my brain is sort of like just let it loose, and it might, who knows what exactly that might do, but I still have the orderly structure.
Well, and there's rumors that King also like keeps note cards by his desk and he writes down ideas ahead of time
Yeah,
too.
yeah,
And I think like Sleeping Beauties, there was one reveal that worked really well in it, and I was like, oh my god, how did this work if he didn't plan it? If it wasn't planned ahead of time. Then I found out that he and his son had written a screenplay first before they wrote the novel, so of course they knew what was coming.
yeah.
You know,
Oh yeah.
so, yeah.
It,
So it happens, but my point is that and like Phil, who's our guy, Phil sometimes wrote by outlines and sometimes wrote by the seat of his pants, and sometimes, like with Ubik, he had an entirely different novel planned.
Yeah, yeah.
And
It's great to see his outlines, and then to read that and be like, wow, that's a different book. You
yeah,
know, that's an interesting book, but he didn't write it.
yeah.
Um,
And everybody, and you can't not read Ubik and not see what novel he intended to write when he started it. He was going to write a spy novel, right? And like a corporate espionage spy novel. And then Half
yeah,
Life became the thing that was interesting to him.
yeah,
And
yeah.
he ended up writing.
Right, right. The whole thing about yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But I was gonna say one thing I remember. I think I think Neil Gaiman said this about the writing. It's like and I love it too. I think it makes sense that it's like what you do when you write the first draft, and you go through it. You're trying to you kind of figure out what you're doing exactly. By the time you're done with the book, then you know what kind of book it was supposed to be. And then what you do is you go back and make it look like you intended that all along. You know what I mean? So it's
Right.
like a trick. It's like you go back and you edit and you put stuff in and you kind of make it fit like as one unit, as if you knew what you were doing the whole time. You know?
Right. So one of the things about let's get into Dreck specifically into the story. And one of the main characters is there's kind of some like hacktivist type characters, like one of the main characters of the first part of the book is
Yeah.
Flip.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I like about this book, and what kind of one of the Dickian themes of it, is that your characters all kind of feel like slightly off from reality. Like
Yeah.
it's not like a complete fantasy world. It's like it's a near future, and it feels kind of like ours, and your characters seem to be just kind of like glitching with reality.
Okay.
Was that an intentional feeling you were
Yeah.
going for?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I definitely think, whenever you're writing any kind of a book, making any kind of fictional thing like a movie or whatever, you're always creating a a new world that's not our world. You know what I mean? Even if it's something just slightly different, like in this world, this book I'm writing doesn't exist. I don't exist in this world because you know what I mean? That kind of thing. It's like in the world of Dreck, Philip K. Dick doesn't exist exactly because
Yeah.
you know what I mean. Not exactly. There's a guy that sort of parallels him in some ways, but he's not like. I mean, he's an author, but anyway. Um, but yeah, oh yeah, and Donald Trump doesn't exist. There's a guy that draws a lot from Donald Trump in there too, but that's not Donald Trump because I'm not trying to represent real people. I'm trying to just make a story and do what I want with it. You know, so because if I try to if I try to represent like a real person, I feel like, well, then I have to do all this research and I have to make everything so absolutely accurate. Like, and I'll go down that trail like my dad's going down, because it's like if he's wanting to represent Jesus and making it be like real, then you're never gonna reach that. You're aiming for perfection.
Yeah, and I don't think you should worry about that so much. It's one of the funny. Think about how inaccurate some of the things in Man in the High Castle are, and the book still
Yeah, I
works.
know, I know,
I
I know.
mean, his idea that the Japanese translator was so angry that the Japanese used the I Ching
Yeah.
in it that but in the end, it doesn't really hurt the novel. It's just like
I mean, it might hurt it for Japanese readers, though. That's the
it
thing.
does.
But the thing is, if it's
That's true.
clearly, yeah, I mean, if it's what I'm trying to say is like I feel better about it if it's
Sure.
clearly not our world, and I can do what I want with it. I love that. Yeah, and like for example, Flip Foster. Oh yeah, I was gonna say also, I guess this is pretty postmodern kind of stuff, but the names of the characters, like for example, it's not that obvious, but this is a Faust retelling, like mostly based on Goethe's Faust, but also Dr. Faustus from Christopher Marlowe, like earlier than that. So basically, the Faust legend, it's that whole yeah.
Before you
And
get into that, before you get
okay,
into the Faust, we should note to people that when Phil died, his next novel he was working on, Owl in the Daylight, he was trying to go for Faust. He was trying to invoke that. And one of the things that I think your characters are going through in here, the kind of Faustian deal that they're making, is accepting how all their data is harvested and used by like our modern like interconnected system.
yeah, in different
Am I
ways, yeah,
correct about that? That's
yeah. I
I
mean,
just
it's
wanted
an
to
it's
see if I got what you were laying down here.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's not just the data harvesting, it's a sort of a general thing. That's why I started with like an app that collects your data and makes predictive purchases and stuff, which is a little bit of a funny thing there. That's a little bit of a Philip K. Dick kind of humor where it's sort of low what's the word? Like I don't know, low key humor there that it's going to be buying you all these things just because it thinks you might want to buy them, and then you can always
Yeah.
return them if you want, that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's not just the data harvesting, it's just in general the trade-offs with technology. There's so many of them, they just keep being more and more. Like for example, with AI, for example, it's the same kind of deal. It's like AI can do all this really interesting, powerful stuff, but it also might just like wreck everything. It's like it's wrecking stuff pretty badly already.
Well, and so this little guy here on the cover, so I may have overanalyzed this dude that
Mhm.
is also kind of in some of the layout.
Yeah, that's
But
my painting I did. I like.
yeah, so now this guy, I thought this kind of insect creature on the cover, for those who are listening to audio, um this guy represented to me like the little things we leave behind, the little like crumbs and things that attract um the whole system to our data. I don't know, am I over
I
analyzing that or
Well, I would think of it more like he's part of I mean in the book there's different sort of parallels I have with like bugs, bugs are involved and stuff. But I think of it more like the people are kind of working like ants and in a way, but more than that, the systems that we build work like it's like androids basically, so it's like Phil's idea of androids where they're just kind of part of the system. They're just working mechanically and working all the time tirelessly. And so it's like people can serve that role, because they're part of the whole system, but also the technology definitely serves that role. So I think that the ant is sort of like a little poster boy for the actual title too, like Dreck. This is the stuff that I'm talking about. So that mechanization of everything.
right. Now each chapter kind of has these tiny little illustrations that are kind of represent the products that are being purchased for the characters. Is that am
Well,
I reading that correctly, or because that's
uh,
kind of how I took it? But I
like
admit I stopped. I didn't really look at them because I like very closely because I'm a very word oriented
yeah,
reader,
yeah.
and so like the
It's like for
visuals
example, here's a little thing.
for the people
There'll be
watching on YouTube, he's
yeah.
showing the pictures. Yeah,
Yeah, they'll kind of pop onto the chapters one at a time. Like so you start each of the three parts starts with just one picture. Like, this is not a pipe right here. This is not a pipe.
So chapter 5 has 5 images, etc.
Yeah. And so it'll go all the way up to 9. And so it's a 3x3 grid. You can fill it up with 9. And that's actually a tic-tac-toe game that's happening. So I don't know. That's like a little bit of a subtle thing, but it's hopefully, at the end there, it becomes more clear that there actually is a winner. It's two cats games, and then there's a winner at the very end in the third tic-tac-toe
I did
game.
not catch that at all.
Yeah, there's a lot of real subtle stuff in there, actually. Don't worry about it. Oh yeah, but see, so for example, in the second to last chapter.
Yeah, I was assuming those were products that were suggested by me first.
It is supposed to look like a product catalog, sort of like an old time print catalog. It's got the little ID number on there and stuff. But yeah, basically for the second to last chapter, you have this kind of a thing. And you don't need to fill in the last one, because this is a game of keys versus locks, basically. So that's how the tic-tac-toe stuff works.
Yeah, for those who are listening to audio, it's pictures of keys and locks, like at the top.
They're going to a grid.
Yeah.
And then to sort of give away what I was doing a little bit, the last one has three keys in a row to show that the key beat the lock, And so
I see.
And so that's like a whole parallel little I kind of like a story, but it's paralleling the main story, basically. Like, the key beat the lock, meaning that the character gets out of the maze that she's stuck in.
I absolutely did not notice that. So
yeah, well, I don't fault you for it. I put in a bunch of really cryptic stuff like that. Like for example, even the little codes, even the little product codes on those are not just random characters that I typed in. Those are hashed versions of the chapter titles. There's no reason that anybody expect anybody to find that, but everything I put in there, like for example, I mentioned the character names and stuff. They all have meaning. They all come from somewhere. But
all right.
But yeah, so
awesomely obsessive. I like it.
Yes, I'm very obsessive. But like, for example, the first section of the book, that's Flip Foster's story. It's a pipe, and then you see a phone pop up there. And Flip, as is noted in a few places, always smells like smoke. He's smoking a pipe at one point. So the pipes are Flip. The phone is the person that calls him, the me first, the basically Mephistopheles, the Levi Ferris in this, basically the big tech company. So it's Flip versus the big tech company, the pipes versus the phone, and it's a draw. Basically, it's a draw.
And the big tech company is called Me First, but there's more than one.
That's the product.
Yeah, that's the product.
Me First is a product made by Triclave Industry or whatever. Yeah, but so there's different variations on Triclave. But they're all what do you call it, anagrams. They're all anagrams of each other. So there's anyway, I don't want to, there's a bunch of little things like this. So there's like, I don't even remember what they are now, but there's a few different variations where it's anagrams of Triclave, where it's the company names, because basically there's different realities in this book, so I don't want to spell everything out too much, but you read the story, and then you're all of a sudden in part 2, you're reading a different story, and it's like, it feels like it's got the same characters, but it feels like a different world. There's different stuff going on, and it's like, yeah, I'm shifting the setting, it's a different world each time.
And so each of the parts has kind of a different technology that is part of what drives that part of the narrative and in that world. And so I didn't pick up, and this is fine, because I think this is natural for a book like this. This is the kind of thing you pick up on second, third reads. But the kind of alternate dimension part of it, the kind of cue to it is the different technology, right? So and correct me if I'm wrong, but Second Sight is the second part, and Dreck is more the third part.
Yeah, that one's called Kicking the Hive, or is it Kicking the Hive? Now I'm trying to remember my own title that I made up. But yeah, the third part is Kicking the Hive. That's what it's called. Yeah. But Dreck is, but yeah, the third part does focus on the product is called Dreck, basically. So the third part could have been called Dreck, but I named the whole book that,
Yeah. Well, and Dreck is a very Dickian thing, and it's, I think fans of Ubik and we'll see like kind of an updating of a similar idea. Dreck is and I'll read straight from the book. Dreck is part drug, part nanotech, part biological material, all the taste and appearance of blackstrap molasses. Yum.
Because I'm a country boy, so I grew up with some blackstrap molasses.
Yeah. And so which of course, I played on that part for my review, calling your book saying Dreck, part surreal, part humor, part science fictional material, all the taste and appearance of a PKD nightmare, all wrapped into unique and modern voice. And I thought that was the best way to describe it. But so like Dreck is like part drug, part all these things. It's kind of like that kind of nightmare material that is kind of seeps through all of reality into and makes everything questionable in a Phil story. And it's one of the things that I think gives it this kind of PKD nightmare feel to it.
Yeah. Like
because we're laughing through most of the book, but once we get to that Dreck part, like I started to like, oh, I got that kind of creep factor.
I mean, there's a lot of creepy stuff. At the same time, it can be kind of lighthearted. It's like, whistling past the graveyard kind of stuff. I think that's the kind of humor I have, and that's one thing I relate to Phil with a lot, but yeah, like in the first two parts of the book, there's not this drug called Dreck. That kind of comes up later, but characters do refer to stuff as Dreck a couple of times, just like as people will say like garbage kind of stuff, which is a German word originally, which I think Phil would probably like. And so but yeah, whenever people are referring to Dreck, they're talking about the technology or that kind of stuff.
Now there's one particular Phil book that and it's funny, I was the Minority Report on Dickheads. I was the one person who liked this particular Phil novel, although it's considered one of his classics. And I know Brian Evanson, for example, considers it one of Phil's best. But there's one that I thought of a lot, and I didn't mention it in my review, but for particular reasons, Martian Time Slip is one of those novels that I feel really connected to because, and for those who don't know, I'm going to get real deep and Phil nerdy on you. Martian Time Slip was inspired by his record store coworker Vincent Lusby's neurodivergent son, who was autistic, and Phil was trying to kind of capture this idea of this character who kind of lives, whose mind is just doesn't relate to the world quite like we do. And as somebody who works with kids with autism, like on a daily basis, and has been around autism my whole life, and I know that this is something we talked about this when you were in San Diego when we were visiting, but the neurodivergence is a thing that you've spent a lot of time around in your life.
Yes.
And it's one of the things that kind of that's one of the things that hovers kind of on the edge of Dreck, is this book that is just kind of divergent from reality in just those little tiny ways. And I think those of us who, I always joke about catching autism when you're around it all the time, because there's certain things that you end up doing because you're around it all the time. So,
and if you're like on the spectrum, like a bit, I feel like you do that mirroring, because like I am myself actually, and so is my daughter. We're on the very verbal and no academic problems part of the well, not really part of the spectrum, but my younger brother, sorry, I'm cutting in a little bit, but
no.
Okay.
I was talking too much.
No, I was just gonna say my younger brother that I grew up with is nonverbal, basically, like just a few kind of set phrases, and so he needs a lot of assistance, and so yeah, he's autistic in the classical traditional kind of way that Philip K. Dick would have been familiar with, so back then they wouldn't have said somebody like me or my daughter was autistic. They might have said Asperger's syndrome, and for girls, actually, they probably wouldn't even say anything, because girls weren't getting diagnosed with a lot of that until fairly recently, because it doesn't necessarily show up the same way in girls.
Right. Well, and I think, you know, for me, like one of the examples of like the kind of the stuck in routine ways, like I didn't used to do this when I was younger, but now like I have to walk the same way every time I go to certain places because I like want to have that routine or that kind of thing. And I
Mhm.
see that this was a thing that was not a concern of mine when I was younger.
Yeah.
It's just an example I always use about
Yeah.
like there's just subtle little ways that you can kind of pick up these kind of neurodivergent things
And
and one of the I just I got I know you had that on your bio and uh I was just gonna say it was something that you were laying down that I was picking up
oh,
in the
cool.
book, you
Yeah,
know.
good, good.
Yeah,
Yeah, I just think it's interesting you said that about whenever you're working with people, if they have, whether they're neurodivergent or whatever, basically, if there's a bunch of people and they're kind of doing something a certain way, then you have a natural tendency to sort of converge with them, and you might mirror a little bit. And so, yeah, it could feel like you know what I mean? And it's sort of, I feel like it's the same phenomenon as like you go to a different country and you might pick up the accent a little bit, you know what I mean? In a different
yeah,
country because you're just converging. It's like a natural social thing that people will do. And I think that a lot of people that are, on the spectrum will do that more consciously than neurotypical people. And so, like for me, that's why I got so into linguistics. I love studying the structure of language and all these rules that are like under the surface of how everything works with language, because most people, all those rules, when they look at them, they kind of feel uncomfortable and they feel like, I don't want to think about that because it's subconscious. That's like how language works. It has to be automatized. It has to be this automatic process that's subconscious, or else it doesn't flow smoothly. But for somebody that has to think about that stuff more consciously, it's so nice to see all the rules spelled out.
right,
So
right,
yeah.
right. Well, it's funny. Usually I'll do a spoiler warning and I'll talk to people about like nitty gritty parts of the book. I didn't really have questions specifically that are spoiler related. I think, well, I want my listeners, if you've made it this far, I hope you've already opened a tab up on, on,
Yeah, it's cheap and it's short. Buy it.
yeah, it's $10. So it's a
Uh-huh.
cheap book. And it will give you lots of entertainment. So hope everyone will go and buy Dreck. And listen and check it out. And you know, you might want to go back and come back and listen to this again after you've read it or whatever. Like the way I like to do things is I like to, if I hear an interview with somebody and there's a book I want to buy, or put on hold at the library. Because that's another thing. If you don't buy it, you could
Mhm.
request it at your library, make sure they carry
Absolutely.
it. It's another thing you can do. I like to, once I get this book into my orbit, and maybe one of the things I like about like when you put something on hold at the library is it'll take 2 or 3 months to get there, right? And then I forget why I wanted to read the book, but I
Ah,
trust myself, and then I read it and I have a fresh experience.
yeah, it's like
Um,
seeing a movie when you haven't seen the preview. That's great.
yes, and so that's my system. So what I want people to do is go out, order Dreck, and wait a little bit and read it so you have a fresh experience, and then come back and check out Cliff's thoughts on it to get the deeper meaning on it. How can people like hook up with if they're enjoying what you're doing? Like how can they hook up with you if they're writing Dreampunk, they think they're writing Dreampunk, they want to get involved with it. How do they find you, Cliff? I mean,
Yeah,
I think you're
well,
pretty easy to find.
yeah, I put my stuff. I usually use Cliff Jones Jr. like on all the social media type stuff that I'm on, which doesn't include TikTok and it doesn't barely include Twitter at the moment. But I do have an account there that'll point you to like something else like Mastodon or Threads or whatever. But but yeah, basically, if you go to cliffjonesjr.com, just jr like that.com, then all my stuff's there. You can kind of find the different social media type stuff that I'm on and message me on that stuff. I don't put my email everywhere because spam is a thing that sucks. But yeah, my email is actually super easy. It's cliffjones@gmail.com. So I just gave it away. But
I don't think spammers listen to this
yeah,
podcast,
I
but
mean,
all the way
it's not
through.
going to be automatically pulled out of it probably. So that's good enough
Right.
for me.
Yeah.
If somebody watches this, they can email me. That's fine. I just yeah,
Yeah.
cliffjones@gmail. That works.
And you love you're around a lot of the PKD Facebook groups and things, so
Yeah.
people can find you to chat PKD with them there too. And I highly recommend people like I said, I can't say for sure because there's a couple months left in the year, but at this point it's in my top 10 for the year, so we'll be talking about it again at the end of the year. If it doesn't make the top, it should make the top 10. If it doesn't, it will definitely at least get an honorable mention. And that would only be because it would be a really great end of the reading year.
Yeah, who knows? Yeah. I'm not
So
yeah.
part of me hopes that I read that many awesome books, but
Right.
but so
Oh yeah,
far it's on the top 10.
yeah. I didn't mention also one thing that might not be super obvious for my website is on Facebook there's a Dreampunk group, in case, if you're on Facebook, if you want to look at a group, there's it's kind of a way to connect with some people, and
Yeah.
that works.
Yeah, and you're going to be at PKD Fest in Colorado next year. Is that the
I'm
plan?
gonna try for sure. I went to the
I'll be
first
there.
two. Yeah, awesome. No, I mean, I should be able to. It's just that I did just get finished doing a Florida vacation and getting a new car and then going to Comic-Con, so that's a lot. So I'll try to do the next PKD festival in Colorado. Should be all right.
Yeah. Hey, I'm planning to be there. So if you made it this far on this podcast, you like PKD talk. Everybody should try to be there in Fort Morgan, Colorado next June. I think 24th is when it starts, June 24th.
Yeah,
But
I think I should make it. I want to make it.
yeah. I'm having to do a lot of traveling next year, so also going home to Indiana for the solar eclipse. So
Cool.
And doing book release party for my choir book, People's Park, which I consider to be pink beam fiction too. So yeah, it's interesting too because this book that I'm currently writing right now is my first attempt to use the PKD formula and actually try to think like Phil. And I've never written in anybody else's voice or tried to think like another writer. And I'm actually trying to think like Phil. And it's because even in People's Park, my book that's coming out next year, is very inspired by Phil, but I wasn't trying to write like him. I wasn't trying to think like him. I was still trying to write like myself. And it's a different muscle when you do that, and I've never experienced it before, so it's an interesting experience. But
my big fantasy novel that I've had in the works forever is sort of like it pulls stuff together from like The Wizard of Oz and Alice in Wonderland and stuff like that. And so that was I started off by reading all that stuff or listening to audiobooks and everything, and so I wound up writing in this sort of old-fashioned kind of way a little bit there, but it's anyway, that's how that started. But
is this one you think you're going to be finishing soon, or is
oh,
this
yeah,
a long-term project? Yeah.
Oh, it's long term, but I mean, I'm so close. I just keep having other things that cut in line, But yeah, the novel is gonna be called The Lasting Lands, and I mean, it's next on my list to finish up. But I was gonna also mention that with Dreck, I started that one. That was definitely inspired by Philip K. Dick because, like I said, I wasn't trying to write a PKD book necessarily, but there was like a contest on Wattpad that was about like fairy tale retellings, and I didn't understand the assignment very well, I guess, and I did a weird dark cyberpunkish kind of a retelling of Faust that was never going to make it in their collection. They're because it was for publication, and if you got in this, but basically, the fairy tale collection they wound up putting out has like a high heel on the cover. It's not the sort of thing I was writing. I don't know what I was doing, but anyway, I picked Faust partly because I had heard that Phil say that I forget how he put it exactly, but basically
said
every writer.
everyone has a Faust novel.
Yeah, everybody wants to do a Faust retelling at some point, that sort of thing. And I was like, yeah, I know I do. Because there's, like you mentioned, the Owl in Daylight, that's a Faustian kind of thing, but he has that in other places too. Like in
Yeah.
particular, there's a lot of mention of Faust in
Well,
Galactic Pot Healer.
there were 4 attempts at Hell in the Daylight too. There were
Yeah.
4 completely different ideas. So
Yeah.
but I'll read about that soon in Unfinished PKD when that comes out.
Cool.
Whenever that may be. But Cliff,
Mhm.
this was awesome. Dreck is a really, really, really great book. Again, I want everyone to go out and get this. It's only $10. It's very, very. I flipped it because that $10 on the back. That's very economical. And there's
It's a
more
slightly
idea.
cheaper
There's
ebook too.
yeah, and there might be, and there's more ideas per the 131 pages than some science fiction novels 3 times the length. So there's lots of ideas in there, and it's highly recommended by not just me, but I think every person I've talked to who's read it really enjoyed it.
Yeah,
Which
so
I
far
guess it's
everybody
just
that's
me and
reviewing it.
Keith.
So far everybody that's leaving a review is raving about it, and that's great. There's just not enough people actually reading it yet. But the response has been great so far.
Yeah, that's awesome. So let's get more readers out there. So Dreck by Cliff Jones Jr. And Cliff will, I'm sure I'll have you back for some kind of panel discussion or something in the near future. We, love getting your excellent take on PKD. It's I definitely appreciate that. So as somebody who and maybe in the future too, because I've been circling doing a Vonnegut episode, so I'll keep you in mind for that as well. Yeah. Hey, he grew up an hour north of me, so
Cool.
I gotta represent the Indiana weird fiction tradition. So on that note, is there anything else you want to tell my listeners before we go?
Oh yeah, I didn't even mention, I guess I did mention a little bit. Mirror Maze also, while you're at it, may as well buy this short fiction collection, Mirror Maze, the very first ever Dreampunk anthology that I put together, and I have several stories in there actually. But in the follow-up that's going to come out, Somniscope, I limited it to 1 short story per author. Mirror Maze has a few authors, have more than one, but anyway, it's a fun book. It's great. I love it.
Yeah.
It's mine. You should buy it also.
Yes. Looking forward to it.
Right.
Yeah, and we'll talk maybe when that comes out. So but folks, get that. And on that note, signing off is always the hardest part for me. It's just, it's the hardest part. But
just
anyone
shut the laptop.
if anybody makes it this far, you ought to know how hard this is for me. So on that note, everybody, check out Dreck. And I'm not sure who. I think next episode will be filmmaker Izzy Lee, who is starting a fundraising campaign for her next film. So a short horror film director. I think he's working on a full-length movie. So Izzy Lee should be the next guest on Postcards from a Dying World. And then after that, I don't know what I got. I don't know yet. I'm thinking about doing a episode on the Foundation TV series, which I think is better than the Asimov novels. Hot take. But we'll see you later, folks. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for having me. That's great.
Yep.